I'm Ken Strong, along with Robert Miller. I'm co-host of, co-chair of the Climate Action Working Group of Marin Conservation League. For nearly 90 years, MCL has been active in Marin County. Its mission is to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of Marin in a changing environment. And that's what we do. And through the Climate Action Working Group, one of our goals are to accelerate greenhouse gas emissions reduction and carbon removal from the atmosphere. And this meeting on building decarbonization primarily fits within those. We have two other MCL committees. There is a issue committees. There's a Parks and Open Space Committee and a Land Use, Transportation, and Water Committee. They advocate for policies on many environmental issues, including how best to adapt to climate change. MCL's climate advocacy is comprehensive. Some people here attend those meetings of the other committees as well. And go to the MCL website. You have to you can go to the MCL website and find out about those meetings. Or if you are on the e-news mailing list, there is information that you can find out about them there as well. The MCL Climate Action Working Group, as I mentioned, has four main priorities: education, educating to motivate action, electrifying everything, decarbonizing the grid, removing carbon from the atmosphere. We advocate actively in front of Marin Clean Energy, MCE, because of its mission and because it's a deep pocket resource that can need more money to electrify everything and decarbonize the grid. We also advocate at local and regional levels with City Council, the County Board of Supervisors, other local agencies, and with our state representative, Assembly Member Connolly and Senator McGuire, as well as Congressman Jared Huffman. There is another effort within the Climate Action Working Group, which is deeply focused on clean energy issues, a clean energy subgroup. If anyone is interested in doing more work in that area, they should reach out to Robert Miller 454@gmail.com, and he can provide you more details about that. You don't need to be an MCL member to attend these meetings, but we would certainly deeply value your membership, as that's what helps funds all of our advocacy work. And so we look for you. If you're not a member, take a look at the website and become a member. For those on Zoom, keep yourselves on mute. Put your questions in chat. We'll try and curate them as we go along. The meeting is being recorded and will be available publicly. And we have a number of folks here in person. We'll go ahead and maybe at this point just go around the room and have people who are in person state their names so that the people on Zoom know who's here. I will start. I'm Ken Strong.
I'm Jim Burrows with MCL. Hey, Mark Chabria with the County of Marin.
I'm Val Cole with MCL.
Sarah Thatcher with County of Marin.
Bernie Summit, Greg Thompson,
Amber Peters.
Bill Carney with Sustainable Marin, and also with Marin Can.
Robert Miller, Marin Conservation League.
Andrew Allenson, local resident person.
Ray Welch, Citizens Climate Lobby, and Climate Future California.
Great. With that, I'm going to put up a. I'm struggling a little bit on my Zoom this morning, and I apologize for that. I'm going to share my screen briefly with just an agenda. So after we've done some more brief introductions, which we mostly accomplished, first we're going to hear from Purnima Dixit, who Jim Burrows will introduce in more detail, with the Bay Area Air District on the NOx rules concerning heat pump water heaters. Then we'll have a report from Madison Vanderclay of the Building Station Coalition on recent regulatory decisions and pending legislation. We'll get an update on the Marin Green Building Codes by Mark Chabria from the County of Marin. And then we'll do a short recap on last month's joint program with the Ecologically Sound Practices Partnership, which featured Daniel Swain. So that is our agenda for today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim Burrows to introduce Purnima.
Thanks, Ken. Dr. Purnima Dixit is with us today. She's a senior air quality engineer from the Bay Area Air District. The Air District, as most of you probably know, regulates air quality and its impacts on public health throughout the 9-county Bay Area, with a staff of roughly over 300 professionals. Dr. Dixit received her PhD from UC Riverside and has been with the Air District for about 5 years after previously working as a private consultant helping clients comply with clean air rules and regulations. Now, amongst her other responsibilities, Purnima is currently working on the Air District rule, as Ken said, that will effectively require use of heat pump water heaters starting next year in 2 general situations. 1 for new residential construction, and 2 for replacement of old gas-fired water heaters when those gas-fired water heaters come to the end of their useful life and need to be replaced. Now, the gas-fired water heaters, as Purnima will explain, are being phased out by the district due to concerns having to do with air quality impacts associated with use of natural gas. Gas heaters also produce CO2, which is a greenhouse gas, of course. And so the conversion from all-electric heat pumps will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's just a one-sentence setup, as maybe all of you know, that there's 2 different kinds of heat pumps, effectively. A heat pump to heat your water and a heat pump to heat your air or furnace. 2 different units, usually in a residential unit. And so today what we're talking about is the heat pump water heater, and that's the rule that goes into effect next year. That rule by the Air District is not without its complications and controversies, and Purnima is here to tell us about the latest developments. Purnima?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that great introduction. And you just made my job so easy, like giving such a great introduction to this whole rule that we're talking about. So good morning, everyone. My name is Purnima Dixit. I am a senior air quality engineer at the Bay Area Air District. I am currently with the Regulatory Development Division at the Air District, and what we do is we amend older rules, and we also develop new rules that impact the air quality in the 9 Bay Area counties. And so today I will be presenting an update on Rule 9.6, which focuses on the concepts. Basically, this particular presentation focuses on the concepts for affordability and availability amendments as it relates to small zero NOx water heaters. I believe that the group already knows about the 2023 rule, which was implemented for 9.6 water heater rule. And this presentation is from 2023. We're now in obviously the phase where we are almost about to implement. We're considering flexibility amendments, and that's what I'm talking about in my following slides. I don't see my slides on the screen. I think you guys were gonna share the screen for me.
Okay. Let's track on that. 1 minute. Purnima, while I'm pulling this up, can you explain what NOx stands for and what they are just generally?
Yes, sorry. NOx are nitrogen oxides, and emissions, those are basically nitrogen oxide emissions that are coming from appliances in the buildings. I will talk a bit more about what these emissions are going to contribute, what the emission inventory looks like. So
We're getting there.
want me to share my screen at all?
I'm getting there.
Okay. Great.
All right.
Okay, great. So, like I said, today this presentation will focus on the concepts, the concepts that the staff is considering for Rule 9.6. I'm going to cover that briefly. Next slide, please. So today's presentation, I will provide a general background on the Rule 9.6 and then the compliance schedule that we're on, and provide you with the latest overview of flexibility concepts that staff is discussing. And I will provide a review of those concepts and what considerations we are making, and then possible timeline for future actions. Next slide, please. Okay, so on this slide, we can see the nitrogen oxides emissions overview for the Bay Area. And to begin, I want to focus your attention to the bar chart on the left. As you can see, the natural gas combustion in buildings accounts for more nitrogen oxide emissions in the Bay Area than all fuel refiners or passenger vehicles combined. Of those emissions, about 90% are from space and water heating. And this is the reason why our rules focus only on space and water heating. The Air District does not have rules that govern emissions from stoves, dryers, or other appliances other than furnaces and water heaters. So on the left, you see the bar chart, which shows you NOx emissions in tons. And you can see the contribution from natural gas combustion in buildings is the highest. And on the right with the pie chart, water heating and space heating combined lead up to over 90% of all the emissions, NOx emissions, nitrogen oxide emissions coming from for the Bay Area emission estimates. Next slide, please. So during our rulemaking in 2023, staff estimated that the replacement of all space and water heaters in the Bay Area would prevent up to 85 premature deaths per year and over $890 million in avoided healthcare costs annually through the elimination of nitrogen oxide and particulate matter emissions from these sources. These benefits are projected to be the most significant in communities of color. Next slide, please. So the upcoming implementation timelines I referred to earlier. So in the March of 2023, the Board of Directors voted to pass amendments to Regulation 9, Rules 4, and Rule 6 to introduce zero NOx space and water heating standards for appliance manufactured after the dates shown on the slide here. The 2023 amendments also included a commitment for staff to report back to the Board of Directors on implementation progress 2 years prior to each implementation date. So, which meant that in 2025, the staff had to provide the board with a implementation progress update, and that was done in December of 2024. And the board of directors heard the first of these reports, and the implementation report, informed by a diverse group of stakeholders in implementation work group, identified certain scenarios in which implementation of zero NOx standards for small water heaters in 2027 may be a challenge. And in that report, there was all the issues that were discussed pertaining to space constraints, electrical or structural upgrades that needed to be made. And so, with that in mind, the staff was advised to consider providing some flexibility with the rule. And so, today's presentation is a discussion to talk about some of those potential regulatory proposals to introduce flexibility to assist with affordability and accessibility of implementation. Also, I want to just on the slide before, yeah, please. Thank you. I want to note that I'm only talking about the January 1st deadline, which is highlighted in red box for the implementation date for small water heaters and the associated concepts with just that. The implementation group for the 2029 furnace is ongoing as we speak. And roughly a year from now, there will be an implementation report shared with all the findings that they find about the furnace rule. So today we'll be discussing the water heater, and that's the 2027 implementation deadline. Next, please. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, staff were discussing potential concepts to flexibility, and in light of that, they've released a concept paper outlining potential concepts on flexibilities for water heaters under 75,000 BTU per hour under Rule 9.6. The concept paper included potential exemption pathways for certain equipment types and certain project situations, which we will discuss through the rest of this presentation. The paper was released on October the 24th for a 30-day comment period, and the staff in that period received approximately 375 comments in response to that concept paper. The paper and all the developments on Rule 9.6 is housed on our webpage. If folks want a link to that or the link to the concept paper, the link to the concept paper is on this slide, but if you want more information, I can drop a link in the chat for that homepage where you can have all the resources and information about this rule. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about some of the concepts that the staff are discussing currently and considering to introduce. First of all, in the concept paper, there we wanted to carve out an additional equipment type of units under 35 gallons. There is currently a gap in the market identified, which market for readily available zero NOx water heaters of this small size. And additionally, these units are typically used in smaller spaces that may face some of the project related challenges that we will discuss in the next few slides. And so the staff is suggesting to remove zero NOx requirement for this size of units. Next, please. Okay, and the next next few concepts that the staff is considering are the implementation where the installation of a zero NOx appliance may be prohibitively expensive or complicated to install. And so in the concept paper, we have laid out a process for applicants to receive a self-certified exemption based on information about their project through an online form. This exemption could be available to projects that are struggling with specialized high heat demands or configurations such as hydronic systems that are more readily available through natural gas fired products, or in situations where there are electrical constraints or space constraints to installing a zero NOx unit. Staff believes that this exemption pathway provides flexibility for the high cost scenarios for which we've heard significant community concern. At this time, staff intends for this exemption process to be instantaneous, with a compliance review conducted on the back end to best understand what exemptions are being used and in what situations that they are being considered. Next, please. Okay, what are staff thinking about in an emergency scenario? So under this exemption, licensed contractors would be able to purchase natural gas fired units to keep in stock and temporarily install for clients if additional work is needed, but a permanent zero NOx appliance is desired or the project does not qualify for an additional exemptions. I will also note that in practice, there are some current voluntary replacement programs that offer natural gas emergency loaners, but they are infrequently used, as typically a heat pump water heater can be installed on the same timeline. This also avoids additional labor costs of installing two separate units. That being said, staff has heard comments and desires to provide this pathway as an option to residents who may need it. Next, please. So another important pathway for exemption that staff is considering is through income qualification. Staff suggested in the concept paper that applicants who are enrolled in existing income qualified programs would be issued an exemption for purchasing a natural gas fired water heater. Staff understands that the increased incremental costs, even for non-complex projects, may not be feasible for some households, and we want to ensure that the implementation of this rule does not cause harm to these types of households. Okay, next slide, please. So, staff is aware that there are potential impacts from the proposed concepts. And in future rulemaking associated with any amendments, staff would assess the delay or loss of emission reductions and public health benefits compared to those estimated for the 2023 amendments. Future rulemaking would also include an updated socioeconomic analysis. Although staff expects that any amendments that include exemptions would result in reduced costs of implementation for the public as compared to the current rule. Resources would be required from the Air District to build and administer an exemption program, as well as to audit issued exemptions and evaluate overall compliance. Staff is considering the addition of a processing fee for exemptions in order to ensure ongoing funding for this program. Next slide, please. So as next steps, we as staff is just considering potential considerations from the exemptions. Next slide, please. And so some of the considerations that staff is especially looking at are self-certification of exemptions, the extent and limitations on exemptions, and some of the nuances of income thresholds or cost exemption. So we are still considering if it should be required to if these exemptions should be completed by a licensed contractor, or if the property owner can complete it by themselves. We're also considering what an appropriate burden of proof is for qualifying exemptions. For example, other programs have required pictures of the space or load calculations for electrical constraints. So we're not sure yet to what extent our burden of proof will look like. And as noted, a simpler application is faster and more accessible for end users, while more detail would ensure that exemptions are only used when needed and will provide more information for improving the program over time. And next, we are considering how exemptions will be limited. Some options are allowing only one exemption per property or allowing applicants to reapply again for the same property in the future. A one-time exemption gives the property owner about 15 years to address implementation challenges and ensures emission reductions occur. Although some properties may be so difficult to retrofit, the cost may not be worth the benefit. Additionally, we are considering if certain exemptions could be phased out over time to ensure emission reductions are achieved eventually, as we expect that technology improvements will reduce costs in the future. And finally, the most important exemption is that we're looking at the income threshold exemption and considering what level of income qualifies for an exemption. Some options used in other programs are 200% of federal poverty level, which is currently used for California utility bill assistance under the CARE program, or 80% of area median income, which is a common level for incentive qualification. We're also considering how income level can be demonstrated. This could be done through self-attestation or through providing information about enrollment in existing assistance programs. Staff would like to ensure that this exemption is implemented in an efficient way, both for the air district as well as in terms of speed of approvals on the consumer side. And then I want to emphasize that on the February of 11th, next month, staff is going to bring considerations of low income designations, especially with that low income part of the exemption concepts that we're talking about to the Stationary Source Committee. I would urge you all to tune in and listen to that presentation as some of the details will be discussed. And board will provide some further direction to staff on how we should proceed from that aspect. I think with this, I conclude my presentation, but I'm open to questions. And also, I think Jennifer Lamb is attending our presentation today, and she's the lead for this rule, and she's also provided us with resources and the web page for this rule in the chat. So please do check that out. And yeah, let's have questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, thanks very much, Board. That was excellent review of where things stand on this somewhat complicated rule pending before the Air District. And in that regard, one of the things that we at MCL have been focused on is the January 1, 2026 commencement date. 27, sorry, January 1, 2027 commencement date for the heat pump water rule. You've described very well, some of the difficult issues that staff is working on to try to develop amendments to make this rule actually able to be implemented. And I know that you can't speak for the board, the Air District Board, but as a practical matter, is it the intention anyway to try to bring these amendments through to completion and finalization, assuming that the board decides to go this direction in time to commence the rule effectiveness next January 1?
Yeah, like you said, assuming the board gives us the direction and aligns with that, we, as much as practically possible, that's our intention, to get these amendments to the board and get this before the January 1st, 2027 deadline. So that is the intention, but we are trying to go forward with that.
Okay, just one or two follow-up questions. January 1, 2027, hopefully the rule commences. And again, it's for new construction and replacement of old gas-fired heaters that need to be replaced. With regard to new construction, new residential construction, are there exemptions being considered for new residential construction, or can we, for all intents and purposes, count on new residential construction being required to use heat pump water? Well, zero NOx heaters, which in effect are heat pump water heaters.
Okay, I'm gonna let
Will there be exemptions for new construction? That's basically it.
I don't think we have any exemptions for new constructions as of now. I would also let Jennifer chime in if there's any extra information she wants to add. But as of now, the new constructions don't come under these exemptions.
Hi. I think that's accurate. I mean, our rules regulate the piece of equipment, right? And so it's the sale or installation of the piece of equipment itself. We don't necessarily have a differentiation between existing construction and new construction specifically in the rule. However, the way that the exemptions are worded, or will plan to be worded, is specific to if it's difficult to install based on existing conditions within like an existing building, right? If the replacement requires rerouting of lines or reconstruction or of whatever, in new construction, that's not an issue, right? You would be able to plan around that. There's also, we do have um, some support like in the building codes just of California too that aren't within our jurisdiction, but is an existing thing that new construction has to be at least electric ready, whether or not you're installing this. So we don't anticipate that the exemptions would be utilized for new construction.
Okay, so then it's just as you say, the exemption for the replacement of gas-fired units that's the focus of the exemption. So the most important exemption, or I don't want to, I'll say an important exemption is for income qualified homeowners. Now, we all know that has the unintended effect of perpetuating, an environmental justice situation complaint where it's in the poorer communities that are sometimes suffering the worst environmental ambient conditions by allowing them with this exemption process to install a gas-fired heater because it's too costly to go with a heat pump water heater. We get that, we understand that, we understand the need for that. Does the Air District have any funding programs or ideas or recommendations in mind that can actually help people that would otherwise qualify for income qualified exemption to have money to in fact install a heat pump water heater?
Yeah, I mean, the funding piece of this is a big discussion that we've been having. I think for us, and some of you might know, in Southern California, for the Southern California Air District, they do have a big funding program. They have a big sort of pot of money that is specifically associated with this based on an old compliance program that they had running for about 20 years. So unfortunately, that's not money that we have a similar analog to. But yeah, I mean, we are discussing if people who are not utilizing the income qualified exemption, if you're that there could be a fee associated with processing the exemption and utilizing that exemption, and therefore then using that to then go towards a funding pot. There are also a lot of programs throughout the area, including MCE as well as other CCAs. In the Bay Area, and we really want to be able to provide folks information about those programs. And we intend to, like, if in an exemption form where you would be sort of stepping through this piece, be like, hey, do you think you need this exemption? And then sort of have like a pop-ups like, hey, did you know about this thing? Sort of if you're selecting that option, to try and steer people there. Unfortunately, just from a funding perspective, we don't feel like right now we have a ton of money to be able to create our own program. I think we do where we can. We would like to um, supplement other programs or steer people to other programs. We do have an existing program that's actually open right now that's specific to installing a heat pump if your main or only heating source in your home is a wood-fired stove or fireplace. So that's our clean heat program, heat with two E's. And so that is funding that we provide to residents to install a heat pump instead of having that wood-fired um, stove or heater. But that's obviously a very small portion of people, but is also a even larger concern in terms of health for emissions. So.
Thanks. And thanks, Jennifer, for joining today. That's very, very helpful.
Prima and Jennifer, I have a question. So based upon the exemptions as you're sort of looking at them right now, do you have any sort of figures as to approximately how many heat pump water heaters will be needed / installed a month once the rules starting to be implemented? And based on whatever you have on that, what are you hearing, if anything, from the contracting community or the vendors about that?
So I
Ooh,
think our best guess right now is 100,000 a year.
yeah.
And so, I mean, we've done a lot of surveys and stuff with contractors. We haven't seen any difference necessarily currently in um, how, I guess, like the lead time in getting a piece of heat pump, like getting a heat pump water heater versus getting a natural gas fired water heater. That was included in the implementation report. And sort of surveys of contractors, and they're like, yeah, it's about the same. Obviously, there's concerns just from like stocking issues during COVID and manufacturing and tariffs and things like that. But there doesn't seem to be any difference necessarily, at least in the between the two types of units, as far as we've been able to tell recently. And more contractors are getting trained on how to install these every day. And so I think for some people, it'll be a learning curve. But I think it's common. And the other thing to note is that um, in terms of manufacturers and just like availability of these generally for manufacturers, heat pump technology is actually much more common in other parts of the country than it is in the Bay Area. We just have a long existing natural gas infrastructure. This is what all of our homes have, and that's fine. But like in the Southeast, all electric homes and things like that are very common. And so just in terms of like the manufacturers that we talk to and the contacts and all of that, they're based at their home bases sort of all across the country. And so it's not, they don't see it as a supply issue necessarily. They're used to supplying these as the sort of main, just the thing that everyone already has and is replacing across the country. And so one region of California is, I mean, more sales for them, but is also not like a huge push.
Good. Bruce Ackerman has his hand up. Bruce, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, thanks for the presentation. And I just wanted to comment on the labor costs of these installations with a story that's just 2 data points. But I recently installed a heat pump water heater on our house and did the work myself. The cost of that, including all the materials, all the fittings, and the permit, was $2,000. My neighbor across the street in a pretty similar vintage house had, in some ways, I think, an even simpler installation because he didn't have to build a cabinet for it. So he was replacing a gas tank water heater with a heat pump water heater, and he got a quote of $14,000 for that work, which floored him, and he ended up doing the work himself. I haven't looked at it, but he was pretty shocked at that quote, and I was as well. So it just seems like one of the things. So clearly the labor cost is the big thing, and can be much higher if you have to worry about the ventilation or bring a new circuit or whatever. But I just wanted to point out that that is really the driving force in the cost of these, and I would hope to see a lot more contractors doing this work and some competition among contractors to be able to bring down those labor costs. I just have a gut feeling that at this point these are a lot of the contractors are seeing that the people who are doing these installations really want to do it, like I do, like my neighbor did. And that we maybe have some money available, and so they're sort of overcharging us for this work. That's it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Betsy, Bickle, you have your hand up?
Thank you. We recently, excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
We recently had our furnace replaced, our gas furnace and our gas water heater. And it's considerably more than 14,000. Oh, and also a gas hot tub heater. And there was a lot of but two things or several things. Well, we did it with the help of because of Resilient Neighborhoods, that organization, and so they were very supportive. And we were looking for rebates, and that's been kind of a rocky situation. But there are several things that I wonder about, and one is, I hate our furnace and water heater were perfectly good, and so I'm glad to hear that there's a program for emergency water heater supplies for people. So maybe our water heater went to that. But I'm wondering, does the old equipment just go into the trash, or and yet you hate to see it reused? So that's one question. And the other is that our house is now considerably warmer in the evening than at nighttime than it used to be. It seems like maybe with the new thermostat and the water with the system, it doesn't have the extreme of hot and cold. And so I'm wondering if there's if we should be really trying to make it drop down colder, or if that's not worthwhile, and what the overall effect of the amount of electricity needed to run these systems, how that's going to affect things. So thank you.
Yeah, part of it. Do you want me to try doing it?
I can start with that, Jen. Again, you can always chime in, and thank you so much for that. But so Betsy, I think if it's a certified contractor who's doing your installations, then it's best. They know they are pretty much certified by the Bay Area Air District, and they would make sure if it's a working condition appliance, they might just use that for another emergency program, but it depends on your contractor. And the next part, Jen, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing, Betsy, I want to know about your first part of your question about the water heater is, for you did this installation voluntarily, sort of proactively, right? Because you're part of the Marine Conservation League and then with Resilient Neighbor, et cetera, and you wanted, and we love proactive action. But for the vast majority of folks that would be installing a water heater under this rule, it would be because that water heater has reached the end of its useful life, right? The requirement within the rule is upon burnout, right? We're not saying on January 1st, 2027, everyone needs to replace their water heater. It's like that as it starts to, as you would be replacing it anyways, you have to replace it with a zero NOx water heater. So in that case, they wouldn't be saving the water heater because it's leaving the house because it doesn't work anymore. So that would be the normal course of the life cycle of that unit anyways. For your space heating question, I'm not 100% sure. That sort of sounds like a thermostat sort of situation. I mean, yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I don't know. It also would depend on the way that it was done. I mean, I know for my home, we replaced like an old gas floor heater with mini split heat pump units throughout our home. So our home was just much better conditioned than it had been before, because one gas floor heater unit in the middle of my house doesn't actually heat things very well or cool things very well. So it would depend a lot on your system and what you did to that. So I don't know that I can answer that for sure. Um, and there was a third part to your question that I have now forgotten.
Okay,
It was
thanks for
about
that.
whether general electricity demands would
Oh,
grow
yes.
hugely because of
Yeah, thank you for the reminder. Yeah, so in the initial rulemaking and then as well as updated in the 2020 the December 2024 implementation working group report, we did do an analysis on the potential impacts to the grid. And overall it we don't show it to be a huge impact to the grid. Obviously, like on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis and transformers and all that sort of stuff, that might be a question. And that's why if there is a PG&E service upgrade that's needed, that is a reason that you would qualify for an exemption. Um, but in the California grid as a whole, we also sort of mapped what this rule will be doing versus what the California state goals are anyways, and that they're still tracking to meet those. And basically it's a slight acceleration, but it's not a huge acceleration of that. The other thing is when you compare the load associated with a heat pump water heater especially, or a heat pump space heating system versus like an electric vehicle, for example, the an electric vehicle pulls, I don't have a multiplier right now in my head, but a multiplier amount of more electricity off the grid than a heat pump water heater or a heat pump space heating system does. It's just not the same level. So PG&E, as well as a lot of the CCAs, are on our working group. They're planning for this. It's in their They include planning for it in their proceedings with the CPUC and their rate cases and all that sort of stuff. So that is our understanding of it right now.
We're gonna take one question out of chat and then David, and then we're gonna have to wrap up this segment. So, Kristen Ritzel asks in chat, is there a way to check out getting money from Cal MTA for tech innovation on heat pump water heaters? They're currently giving money for helping implementation of induction stoves. And how many millions and then a second question, how many millions of dollars are saved in social and healthcare costs estimated by Rule 9.6?
Okay, Crystal, I will take part two of this question. How many millions are saved in social and healthcare costs for Rule 96? So it was back in 2023. If the implementation was all zero emission building, all zero emission heat water heaters, if that was the case, then it would have been about $890 million avoided in healthcare costs that was estimated if it was a full implementation. But now, considering the flexibility and the fact that not all the equipment is going to go to zero NOx, that would be slightly lesser. We don't have those exact estimates as of now, but it was predicted to be in the order of $890 million before. And the part one question,
But that's
Jen,
an annual number too. So
that's
the
the annual number, yes.
Yeah, so the $890 million is at full implementation of both 9.4 and 9.6. So for both the space and water heating rules, that would be $890 million per year in avoided healthcare costs. But yeah, we'll have to update that. Obviously, I think when we look at the emissions, like two-thirds of that is space heating, third of that is water heating, probably, right? And then, but that's sort of the goal, the goal number that we're shooting for. Um,
The Cal MTA question, Jen.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different sources of funding, right? There's also a bunch of other groups. There's like the Advanced Water Heating Initiative that's doing a lot of projects trying to figure out, like fill the gap that we identified for smaller water heaters, all of that. So yeah, there are a lot of different there's a lot of work going on this right now, and when it comes to residents, like I said, we'll try and point people to where they can get funding. But yeah, there also is a lot of work going on for innovation in this space as well.
And David, here's the last question.
All right. Thank you, first of all, for joining the meeting today. It's very helpful. And I have two questions. They're both big picture questions. First one, I'm understanding there's going to be a public workshop to discuss the proposed amendments, and then at some point, some board decision, not by the Stationary Source Committee, but by the board on implementing, adopting the amendments and moving ahead with implementation. So the first question is, what's your best guess as to when those two things are going to happen? I realize it's crystal ball stuff. The second one is, I'm wondering how CARB's recent move toward a more emissive sales limits plus credits affects or might affect what the Bay Area Air District does in this area.
Yeah, pardon me, I can take both if you want.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
that's fine.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so so our next milestone is the February Stationary Source Committee. We will see what they say. In terms of after that and like having rule language on the street and sort of walking through that. So will, I think, either be a public workshop in the more standard sense that we do a public workshop, or we may do that update, which also our public workshops always are. We may do that update as actually an update to our full board of directors, because more people than the members of the Stationary Source Committee are interested in this. That would just be like an informational update and sort of providing the same type of information and opportunity for public comment that we would in a public workshop, but just with our whole board of directors there. And for them to be there, we have to do that as one of their meetings. And so our hope is to do that in the spring. Spring is a long time, but that's the best. Spring is the best I can say. And then, as Portima noted in an answer to a previous question, we have to get this done before the end of the year. So fall hearing.
Thank you.
And then to your carb question, I mean we're in contact with the carb staff that's working directly on those rules really regularly. I think obviously they have a different set of conditions that they're working with. They have a different set of authority that they're working under than we do, just as sort of different types of agencies. And they also have a different set of conditions working with the state as a whole and all of the complexities that come with that. And so while they have a different sort of path that they're going down, we still see it as complementary, right? I mean, what their plan is to sort of ramp up the market at a state level to have more and more of these installations happening, and more of those installations will be happening in the Bay Area once they have to be, and so that's yeah, I think it's, while they're not exactly the same, we still see them as complementary to each other. It's just one's more of a command and control rule, and one is sort of looking at this at a more macro level from the manufacturer point of view, but that's maybe appropriate just based on our different jurisdictions. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Portima and Jennifer, for the presentation. We're going to have to wrap up this and move to our next speaker now. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, great. And we'll actually hear a little more, I think, about the CARB rule from our next speaker. So we're now going to hear from Madison Vanderclay of the Building Decarbonization Coalition. Madison is the Senior Manager of Government Affairs there, where she focuses on legislation and the budget processes in California, including advocating for decarbonization policy in Sacramento and moving legislation that BDC is sponsoring. She worked in the California legislature on housing affordability prior to taking this position. And so Madison, welcome. And are you going to be able to share your slides?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me
Wonderful. All right.
get those shared up here. And thank you so much for having me. Great to be here with everyone. And thanks, Ken, for that great introduction. As he said, my name is Madison Vanderklaan. I am the Senior Manager of Government Affairs at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. I work primarily in the world of the legislature, but I do also work quite closely with our team on some of the other air district rules and regulatory policies that we see, and so have some ability to speak at a high level to those. I want to give a brief overview about who we are at the Building Decarbonization Coalition, or BDC, if you're new to us as an organization. We were founded a few years ago by Panama Bartholomew up in Petaluma, actually, really with the goal of bringing together all of the key stakeholders who need to be involved in this movement around one table and to push collectively towards the same goal. So we use policy, research, market development, and public engagement to really try to support the adoption of electric buildings. And we have both, I would say, members in all of the different fields necessary. And just to give you a brief idea of who some of those members are, these are our trailblazer members here who provide financial contributions to BDC through our membership program. You'll see primarily equipment manufacturers. You'll also see utilities and CCAs, but our membership is a lot broader than that. We also work very closely with environmental groups and environmental justice groups. And it really is our goal that we can push towards broad consensus-based advocacy efforts here to make sure that everyone who needs to be involved is on the same page and pushing towards a collective goal. So that's a little bit about who we are. As I shared, I work mostly in the advocacy space here in California on legislation. And I did want to also share briefly at the start of the call this really helpful report our team put together all about building decarbonization, kind of like your Spotify Wrapped, but it's the BDC Wrapped of 2025. And if you're curious at looking at not just the trends in California, but nationally about the adoption of heat pumps, how electricity prices impact electrification efforts, and what kind of different policies we're seeing crop up in states across the nation. This is a really excellent resource and a really excellent overview, and we're very excited to see some of this material come through, including, for example, that the US is now the world's #1 market for heat pumps. I think in large part due to great work from folks happening across the nation, including from folks like the Air District working to encourage those policies. So brief plug for that. Now, as we get kind of into some of the policy, there was a lot of discussion earlier about the Air District rules at the Bay, as well as kind of some questions about how it's going to work at the California Air Resources Board with their zero emission appliance rules. So I'll provide a little bit of background about that. December 11th, just last year, CARB did host a public workshop where they released a new proposal for transitioning to zero emission space and water heating markets. This proposal was a long time in the making. They've been looking at doing this kind of rulemaking for a couple of years now, and it's gone through a couple different iterations. And this was a new one. So this proposal, rather than the earlier 100% zero emission sales mandates that they showed back in 2025, they instead have proposed a market-based credit trading system that essentially would work through escalating statewide sales limits placed on manufacturers beginning in 2030. I've also linked the workshop slides here in the workshop in case it's of interest to dig in a little deeper. But to give you an idea of what those standards look like, you can see on the right here their proposed limits that CARB set forward in their workshop. You can see that the threshold starts at 2030 with about 40%. Space and water heating needs to be zero emission, can be gas emitting, which decreases down to 25% by 2045. Likewise, 60% for water heating goes down to 50%. And manufacturers would essentially comply by using credits that could be earned, banked, or traded to other manufacturers. They can earn those through selling zero emission equipment or selling fewer gas units than they are permitted under these limits. And they can also earn those through donating units to programs that serve low-income communities and help those communities transition over to zero-emission equipment. Manufacturers would then have to begin reporting on their sales in 2029, with annual reports beginning in 2030. I do want to share that, if this is something you're interested in commenting on, if you're interested in just watching this rule and kind of seeing what comments folks have to make, those comments are actually due today, January 21st. And so I think we'll start to see stuff trickle in on the docket here with input for the Air Resources Board. So it's a really big, broad view. I would say of this proposed rule, obviously this has a lot of implications, I think, for the rules that we see proposed at the regional level, for example, by the Bay Area Air District, as well as I think we can expect to see quite a bit of engagement from manufacturers, environmental groups, and other partners in shaping what a future of this rule could look like. And Ken, I see a question. Can you explain the different jurisdictions of the Bay Area Air District, the Air Resources Board, and the South Coast Air District? Yeah, absolutely. Without getting into too much detail, I mean, the difference is really regional. The Bay Area Air District, of course, oversees the 9-county Bay Area. The South Coast Air District, or Air Quality Management District, oversees a really significant portion of Southern California, including San Bernardino, Los Angeles counties. There are millions of people that fall under that district. And the California Air Resources Board, in comparison, would apply to the entire state. So it oversees not only the folks who are in that district, my understanding, but also anybody who falls outside of those regions. So it would have pretty significant impact, I think, across the board.
And just quickly, that wouldn't the CARB's ruling wouldn't preempt the Bay Area Air District ruling, would it?
Not to my understanding, no.
Madison, do you want me to?
Yeah, please go for it, Jennifer.
Yeah, I can address that. Yeah, so no, we have separate authorities actually, and so everywhere in California is covered by both the Air Resources Board as well as their local air quality management district. Everyone has an air quality management district. Typically, we regulate emissions from stationary sources, and the California Air Resources Board has a more sort of overarching authority associated with mobile sources, as well as they have pretty overarching greenhouse gas authorities. So their sort of greenhouse gas reporting program in AB 32. So the actual distinction between our two rules is that ours is a zero NOx rule, and theirs is actually a like zero emissive equipment rule, and is actually based on their greenhouse gas authority. And so when we're talking about heat pumps and things like that, zero NOx and zero GHGs have a full overlap. But that's actually the distinction.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate you jumping in. Let's see, moving on to just a couple updates from the CPUC. I saw some discussion earlier of the CalMTI program, and we'll get into that in a little bit as well. But Ken mentioned that there was some interest in this decision from the CPUC around tariff on-bill financing pilots. And how tariff on-bill financing pilots work is when a customer, particularly say a renter, wants to adopt a zero emission appliance, instead of having to pay for that upfront, the utility can provide the upfront capital needed to install that equipment, and then it's paid for over time by a decarbonization charge that is placed on the customer's utility bill. And this really relies, I think, on affordable energy and on customers experiencing the cost-saving benefits of transitioning to more energy efficient equipment. And so when they're able to save money on their bill because of the installation of this equipment, that creates the gap where you can then create the decarbonization charge to actually pay for the equipment over time. And this is a really cool solution in particular for customers who may lack access to traditional financing mechanisms, who may not have the credit scores needed to necessarily take on a loan to pay for the equipment, or for folks who don't otherwise have a lot of agency in terms of what equipment is installed in their homes, so renters in particular. And so it's pretty exciting to see this move forward. As I mentioned, it does transfer from occupant to occupant with the utility bill because the charge is placed on the bill itself and is attached to the meter and not the actual customer, which is what kind of creates this ability to avoid having to charge a customer's credit line, for example. So the CPUC did approve their proposed decision recommending approval of Southern California Edison's tariff on bill pilot. There were several other pilots that were proposed and put forward in front of the CPUC during this proceeding as well, that were either not approved for a variety of reasons. There were a couple that were not able to be approved, for example, a few CCAs that overlap with PG&E's territory, because PG&E is currently in the process of updating their computer systems and will not be able to logistically implement this kind of proposal for the next few years, which means that the other IUUs are currently directed to monitor the adoption of this proposal for lessons learned before bringing forward another idea to the California Public Utilities Commission. This will be about a $7 million pilot program, which is expected to serve over 200 residential customers and begin implementation between 2026 and 2027. So it's a really creative model, and one that I think, oops, didn't mean to switch my slide quite so early. It's a really creative model, one that I think will be really integral for expanding access to multifamily housing situations. And Michael, I see your question. What if the equipment results in higher utility costs? That is the experience of several residents of San Anselmo after installing HVAC heat pumps. So I will say that within the detail of this proposal, there's quite a bit of work there being done by the CPUC to figure out the consumer protections angle of this, because as I mentioned, it does really rely on those cost savings, and those are the situations where we can expect it to be most effective. And so those are all that's exactly the kind of implementation detail that the CPUC is going to have to figure out. And I think what we can probably expect to see is that the pilot will only move forward for customers who are expected to see bill reductions. And there are ways to make projections about which customers will likely experience higher versus lower bills, depending on their particular rates, depending on where they are located in the state, depending on if they are if they currently have air conditioning or if they will be adding air conditioning to their system. And then Susanna, I see your point as well about natural gas will be going up 25% for the Western states due to shortages, which is a pretty daunting number, but may also increase the value proposition of electrification. So just to put a finer point on your question, Michael, there are a lot of different factors that SoCal Edison will have to consider in determining whether or not they think a customer will experience higher or lower utility costs, and therefore in determining eligibility for the pilot program itself. But it's a really good question. The CPUC also did vote to adopt the first California Market Transformation Initiatives program, which again is another really exciting solution in particular for some of these hard to serve populations like renters. And this is specifically targeted towards plug-in room heat pumps, meaning window heat pumps, for example, like you see here, like the gradient heat pump in 120 volt induction stove technology. And part of what's really exciting about both of these proposals is that these are plug-in equipment types, meaning that you can literally take your heat pump and set it on your window and plug it directly into a 120 volt outlet, which means that you don't necessarily have to undergo some of the more expensive retrofits or electrification upgrades that you might have to consider for other types of equipment, things like panel upgrades, which thankfully are less and less necessary, but do still present a pretty significant upfront cost, ductwork, or other types of permitting obstacles. Leslie, I see your question. Please clarify, SoCal Edison's TOP is a tenant improvement paid for by the tenants that ultimately benefits the property owner. Is there anything built into the program that would reimburse the tenant? So I think the point of this program is to capture the payment of the payment for the equipment itself in that decarbonization charge. So the tenant is not reimbursed for the equipment. And again, because it's tied to the utility meter itself, it is paid for over quite a long period of time. And so the idea, I think, being that this is not going to be imposed on tenants in a way that is going to charge them more money than they would otherwise be paying for less efficient equipment and less efficient utility bills. So it's a fair point. I mean, about customer protection and how do we determine, who should be paying for this and how. I think the idea behind this is really thinking like if somebody is saving money either way, let's give them the chance to choose something that's electric and give them the option here. Um, Now, obviously, to your point, that does remove some of the obligation from the property owner. But I think there's really a policy question here too of if we can make this accessible to folks without increasing their monthly bill. Um, is this something that really needs to happen anyway? Definitely recommend digging into kind of the meat of that adopted proposal if it's of interest, because it's pretty interesting stuff. And I think there is a lot that is going to have to be learned there in terms of those consumer protections and tenant protections and making sure that everything is done in the tenant's best interest. Really good question, though. Definitely welcome other thoughts there too, if folks have additional insight. I did see a question earlier too about whether CalMTA could be expanded for heat pump water heaters. I imagine that's something that could be done in the future. This particular decision was just focused on the plug-in kind of window heat pump technology and the 120 volt induction technology. I think when it comes to incentives for heat pump water heaters, we do largely look to programs like Tech Clean California, as well as some of the regional programs offered by CCAs and other groups. And I would certainly like to see more state funding allocated to programs like Tech Clean California to support more incentives for the water heater market and getting those out to folks across the board. But that's really a pitch I need to make to a lot of legislators this year. So if that's of interest to you, definitely let me know and happy to share more about that. Moving into legislation. So we have just seen the start of legislation here in California beginning in January. It's been a pretty exciting year already so far. The new pro tem Monique Limon has taken her seat. She is coming out of Santa Barbara, and she's made some changes to committee roles, mostly to take effect at the beginning of February. For example, Senator Allen will be replacing Senator Becker as the chair of Senate Energy Committee. Senator Allen is from the Los Angeles region. I believe he's represents some of the Palisades, for example. He's, I would say, a pretty great environmental champion. I think this is actually his last year in the legislature, so he will likely be terming out soon. But overall, he's been great on electrification, great on energy issues. It's exciting to see him step into this position. There was also a recent Politico interview with the Assembly Energy Chair, Cotty Petrie Norris, who suggested that she expects to see a continued focus this year in the legislature on affordability, meaning energy affordability, and also implementation of some of the really big energy measures that we saw passed by the legislature this past year, including things like grid regionalization and adopting a transmission infrastructure financing fund in order to help remove some of those costs from rates and reduce the cost of capital. Just to give you an idea of some of the timelines that we're looking at here in the legislature, we are still pretty early in our 2026 legislative session. So that means that February 20 is actually the last day for bills to be introduced. Now, this year is a little bit unusual. Things have been moving pretty quickly here in Sacramento in January, in large part because the number of bills that legislators were allowed to introduce was actually lowered this past year from around 50 to about, it might be about 30 bills now. And what that means is that legislators had all of these bills that kind of made it to their first House Policy Committee and then failed, and that vehicle can still be used. So legislators have begun gut and amending those dead bills with new material, and all of those gut and amended bills have to make it all the way through their first House process, meaning policy committees and a floor vote by the end of this month here in January. So there are quite a few bills that fall into that category. I'll get to a couple in just a second that I think you might be interested in. But all of which to say that the legislature is unusually busy here in January, but that the majority of bills we can expect to see introduced by February 20. And here are a few areas where I think we can expect to see a lot of action, as well as some of the bills that we've already seen introduced. One of those is the CHEAP package by Senator Weiner, based out of San Francisco. This is the Clean Homes and Energy Affordability Package. One of these is SB 222. This is the Heat Pump Access Act, which actually we are very excited to co-sponsor, and I will be sharing a little bit more about that in the next slide. The other bill in this package is SB 868 about solar plug-in play. It would exempt portable plug-in solar panels like basically balcony level solar panels from utility interconnection requirements and prohibit utilities from imposing fees on those panels. And the idea being that you have a smaller panel that can just plug into any old outlet that a renter or somebody who maybe has limited space or ability to put this on their roof could instead put it out on their balcony and plug it in and experience the benefits of solar. Senator Allen recently introduced SB 894 about wildfire hardening. This is just intent language right now, so there really isn't any meat or any details in the bill itself, but what this bill says that it would intend to do is to create a loan loss reserve and interest rate buy-down program to support home hardening in defensible space called the California Wildfire Resilience Program. As I mentioned, he also represents the Pacific Palisades down in LA, so his district was impacted by the really tragic wildfires that happened at the beginning of 2025. So I imagine this issue is very close to home. I certainly am very curious to see whether this interest rate buy down program will allow electric upgrades to be included and to be eligible. I think that could be a pretty exciting way to make electrification upgrades accessible to a broader array of customers, particularly those in wildfire areas. I also think that we are going to continue to see a lot of action about data centers this year. And the reason that I share this, even though it may not seem directly related to building electrification, is because it really fits into the broader legislative perspective on utility energy affordability and how we think about the utility system as a whole in order to bring down those rates for customers who we are trying to support electrifying. And so what you see particularly from legislators like Bauer Kahan and Senator Padilla is a focus on trying to understand how data centers and particularly the boom of data centers that some folks from the tech industry are anticipating is going to impact rates for other customers, such as residential customers. Now, some folks like the utilities will argue that bringing on additional data centers will actually help stabilize and potentially lower rates, even for residential customers. And the argument for that is because you are bringing on new electrical load at a significant level, and therefore you are spreading the fixed infrastructure cost that a utility has across a greater number of customers and kilowatt hours, therefore bringing down the per unit electrical cost. Some folks disagree with that. I certainly am not an expert enough to know, either way, but I think that we will continue to see a lot of interest from the legislature on understanding and studying whether we can see any cost shifts from new data centers being brought online to residential customers and how that might overall affect electricity rates in general and the value proposition of home electrification. So that was quite a few bills that I just threw your way. Let me check the chat recently, and then I will, move on to one which I am really, really excited to be sharing, which is, as I mentioned, SB 222, the Heat Pump Access Act. This is a reintroduction of a bill that we actually carried last year, SB 282, also with Senator Weiner. And this is actually co-sponsored by the Bay Area Air District, who we have online, as well as the San Francisco Bay Area Planning and Urban Research Association. And what this bill would do is create a streamlined pathway for permitting heat pump HVAC and water heater installations for residential retrofits. Unfortunately, what we've seen from contractors and customers across the state is that the permitting process is really a patchwork, and it can add pretty significantly to the costs associated with installing a heat pump, depending on your jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions make the process super easy. You go online, you pull the permit, it costs, 50 to $100. Somebody comes out later and inspects the installation and everything works smoothly. And unfortunately, that is not the case in every city across the state. Some require pretty significant documentation requirements. in many cities, you don't necessarily know going into a project how much your permit is actually going to cost you, which means that your next door neighbor, particularly in areas like the Bay Area, maybe was able to pull a permit for $150, but you are hit with a permitting fee of upwards of $800 or potentially thousands of dollars. And so what we see is this does unfortunately create a pretty significant barrier for people who are hoping to electrify, particularly those who are tapping into state incentive programs like Tech Clean California or like the CCA programs, or even ones that we see offered by South Coast Air Quality Management District down in Southern California. All of these programs require you to pull a permit in order to be eligible. And so it really makes sense to have the permitting process be simple, transparent, and navigable to make sure that we are able to get more people to actually tap into these programs and ultimately use the legal permitting pathway for heat pumps. So if this is something you're interested in, we'd certainly love to have you consider joining us in support. I have our support letter linked here as well. But I'd be happy to take any questions about this bill or any of the things talked about today, or even comments from folks if there are other pieces of legislation that maybe I've missed that are of interest. But super appreciate the opportunity to join you all and chat a little bit about buildings.
Thanks for that, Madison. And before if people have any questions, please raise your hand or whatever. But the first thing I wanted to say is a couple of sort of related plugs. So per this discussion of what's going on in the legislature at our Climate Action Working Group meeting next month, February 18th, Damon Connolly is going to be here too, and he will update us on his legislative agenda. We certainly will get his take on things like SB 222 and some other bills that we might be considering at that point. So that's point number one. Point number two is I'd like to plug the excellent policy call that Madison hosts every month online for the BDC. It really is a good update on sort of all the stuff she talked about today. In fact, watching last month's call was what prompted me to call Madison and see if she could come talk today. So for people who are interested in this sort of detail on what's going on at the legislature or in regulatory action, this is a really good call, and there's a lot of good people on it who contribute to what we all learn. So a great plug for that. Questions?
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Madison, one number really jumped out at me on your slides, and actually I've seen it before. It's the the California Air Resources Board most recent proposal to reduce the use of gas-fired heat pumps. And I can only describe it as a very tepid proposal by CARB. It shows that exactly that by 2030, that hopefully that there would be, when you say mix of sales, we take that to mean gas-fired heaters or heaters that emit NOx, for example, so that 60% in 2030 for water heaters, ratcheting down to only 50% in 2045, meaning that 20 years from now, CARB is expecting that 50% of heat pump water heaters would still be gas-fired. I'm kind of at a loss for knowing why it is that they're being so tepid about this. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, as to the why, I think the folks from the Bay Area Air District mentioned earlier that the Air Resources Board is dealing with kind of a specific set of constraints this year. I will say generally what we've seen this year in California politics has been a more moderate swing following the 2024 election. I think that really pushed both a lot of legislators as well as Governor Newsom into his administration to kind of focus on, I would say, affordability narratives and abundance narrative, which means that I think in some ways there is less political appetite for very aggressive rulemaking. It's hard for me to speak specifically to this since I haven't had those conversations closely with staff, and I understand there are a lot of factors that they're weighing, but personally I would think that that's a part of it is that the political climate has shifted pretty dramatically even here in California.
Thanks. Sue, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question about how likely you think it is that the CPUC would approve adding balcony solar or allowing people to do other sources of solar because of their, sort of tight uh, requirements for allowing that because it is a threat to PG&E's profit margins. I also just wanted to say just quickly that right now there is a $4,000 to $8,000 rebate from the state for a heat pump. So that's, and that money's not going to last. So if anyone's thinking about it, you have to do it before you put it in. And there's lots of requirements. You can go to the switcheson.org to find out more. But anyway, I just wanted to ask that question about the CPUC because, rooftop solar had such a rough ride.
It's a good question and love the plug for the heat pump incentive. Yes, if you're considering it, definitely go check it out. And the Switches On is a great resource for that purpose too, in particular for seeing if there are stackable incentives with, for example, from your CCA or if you live in SMUD territory or wherever else, there may be incentives that can stack on top of that $4,000 to $8,000. To your question about the Solar Plug and Play Act, so good question, first of all, about the California Public Utilities Commission and where they might fall on this kind of thing. Because this is being led through a bill that kind of sidesteps some of those issues. Now, of course, it's possible that if the Public Utilities Commission has concerns with this, they could take that to Governor Newsom. That could impact whether or not he might sign or veto this kind of policy. But Senator Wiener is almost sidestepping that issue altogether. I imagine he will still have to have conversations with the utilities or with other energy providers to kind of see what thoughts that they might have about this particular approach. I will say that this has, to my knowledge, only been passed in one state so far, which is Utah. And it's really been modeled after what we've seen in a lot of European countries, including Germany. But there have been a lot of different states across the country this year who have introduced pretty much this exact type of legislation to try to exempt those plug-in solar panels from those utility interconnection requirements. And I think I'm not super clear on the specifics of how the technology actually works and how you have a backstop to make sure that the electrons go where you want them to and they don't flow back onto the grid. I think that's a question for somebody a lot smarter than I am. But it's definitely pretty interesting to see it introduced, and I'm curious to see if it can make it through.
Betsy?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that we borrowed from our neighbor some solar panels and put them on our deck. And we enjoyed getting this free energy so much that my husband, so we bought some, so we have our own now. And then we bought batteries to store the electricity in the battery. So there's no PG&E or MCE or whatever problem. Our house is on a north-facing slope, so we actually only have sun on our deck 6 months a year. So the other 6 months, the panels are stored away. But it's kind of amusing to watch the two of us have to go out and we change the exact angle of the solar panels throughout the day to get the maximum input. And I have to say, during the winter, the batteries, one of the batteries, we have the refrigerator plugged into it, and we have it on a timer, so the battery only recharges at night during the cheaper hours, which I'm concerned that now I thought that was 100% green, but it doesn't seem to be with MCE. So it does carry the refrigerator through the night, but it wouldn't be a very long-term help in the winter if we had our electricity cut off. So
Really cool to hear your experiences with it, from somebody who has actually been able to kind of use this equipment. And what I've heard too is that exactly to your point, some people already are using balcony solar or plug-in solar. And this is, I guess, trying to create a more explicit regulatory model for that to allow more folks to tap into that. Appreciate that comment, Betsy. Cool to hear you.
Yeah,
To hear
thank
that
you.
you're using it. Yeah.
Yeah, Bill Carney.
Yeah, with the emphasis on affordability that were talking about and the political interest in that, I wonder if you could steer us towards any easily accessible and easily understandable resources on just what is the equation that makes or equations that make going electric in these various ways uh, a cost saving step. I think that's such critical information, and it's kind of hard to lay your hands on. The other just observation I want to make in terms of that really disturbing chart you showed from the Air Resources Board showing, getting to 50% gas in 2050 or thereabouts, and likewise on the heat pumps. That's nowhere near meeting California's goal of zero net carbon emissions by 2050. So there's a real mismatch here between apparently the current political climate and what we need to get to and what California has said it's going to get to. So any comment on that would be great, Tim.
So just so I understand your question, are you looking for resources that support the argument that electrifying is affordable, data that shows that it can be affordable, or are you thinking more generally about what are the resources that kind of synthesize how the utility model works and how a customer can determine whether or not they'll save on their energy bill by electrifying?
Yeah, so from an advocacy standpoint, we're out there talking to a council or to an individual saying, yeah, you really ought to go get some heat pump. And they go, what's it going to cost me? And I need those arguments that are solid, need places to send them where they can see, oh yeah, those incentives may have gone away or being quelled down, but it's still worthwhile doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll definitely say the Switch is On Again is a really phenomenal resource to send to customers because they can plug in, their address and their city and see exactly what incentives they might be eligible for. So that kind of addresses the upfront cost part of the equation, but I hear you about, the operational question too. And it's a really hard question to answer because it can vary so much from customer to customer, I think is the reality, because people's energy bills are highly personal in a way, depending on whether or not you have a pool water heater or do you have kids at home? Does your bill change when your kids go off to college and you're using less energy at home? And so it can be really, I think, tricky to map out generically what savings somebody might experience. So let me look into some of the resources and see what I can send your way. I will also point you towards RMI recently released a analysis that they conducted of different jurisdictions across the state and the level of savings that they thought somebody could experience by installing a heat pump and electrifying. And those are, I would say, broad level data and statistics. And again, hard to map that onto somebody's specific or any specific customer's projected bill impacts. But I think that's also a great advocacy resource. And there are a few other things that I'll see that I can send your way some resources and some information.
Wonderful,
and if you can,
thanks.
yeah, absolutely. And if you can drop your email in the chat, I can send that to you specifically, or I can send that to Ken and Jim afterwards.
Yeah, if you can send it to Ken Strong, I think
we'll pass it on. Yeah, and with that, Madison, thank you again so much for giving us an update on all of these things. We're now going to have a short presentation from Mark Shabria about what's going on, about where we are in Marin County. And this is all information that actually BDC also compiles statewide as far as where people are with their green building codes. So, Mark, can I hand it off to you?
Sure. Yeah, let me share my screen here. Cool. There we go. All right, yeah, so hi, everybody. I'm Mark Chabray. I'm the Green Building Coordinator for the County of Marin. So I coordinate our green building programs, and Ken asked me to come and just give a little overview of some of the progress that we made here in Marin in 2025 around green building policy. The county has a green building ordinance that applies only to unincorporated Marin. But a lot of the work that I do is coordinating with cities and towns to support them in their adoptions and to promote consistency across jurisdictions. So a lot of that coordination is done through the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership, or MCEP. And I'm happy to say that we've made some good progress toward that consistency recently. So I am going to include Marin cities and towns in this update today and kind of give an overview of how we're doing countywide. So first, I just want to give a little bit of context, because I know not everybody has been following this super closely, but it was a pretty turbulent year with respect to local building codes as a result of some state legislation. So AB 306, which turned into AB 130, essentially put a freeze on new local regulations on residential buildings until 2031. And so this law is intended to make things easier and more predictable for builders who are working on rebuild efforts from the LA fires, but unfortunately, it limits local authority to enact policies that reduce emissions from building energy use. So as a result, some jurisdictions in Marin rushed to get new codes in place before that freeze went into effect. Other jurisdictions, like the County of Marin, made some changes under the exceptions that are built into AB 130. And so without really getting into the weeds on this, I'll just identify that the most notable exception to this freeze is referred to as the general plan exception. Basically, the exception states that local policies are allowed under certain conditions when they align with programs outlined in a jurisdiction's general plan. So I'm not a lawyer, and the legal departments of different jurisdictions interpret this different ways. But the County of Marin's general plan has really strong and explicit support for energy reach codes. So we've been advised that we could still make adjustments under this exception. Some jurisdictions in Marin have older general plans that might not mention energy codes, and so they might not be as well positioned to do so. But anyway, this AB 130 restriction is new, so we're keeping a close eye on jurisdictions, all over the state to see what proves to be possible in this new situation that we're in. So next, I just want to identify that there are two main green building policy pathways that Marin jurisdictions have embraced in recent years in order to reach beyond minimum state requirements. The first is Cal Green Tier 1. It's an optional level of enhanced standards that's offered by the state as a part of the California Green Building Code. Jurisdictions that choose to opt into Tier 1 have more stringent requirements across a whole bunch of different impact areas like water conservation, waste diversion, energy efficiency. Some of the most notable Tier 1 requirements involve stronger EV infrastructure requirements. And Cal Green Tier 1 is designed to be high impact and low cost, and it offers a standard way to reach beyond state minimums. And then the second policy that's being embraced here in Marin is the single family remodels reach code, also known as the Flex Path. This applies specifically to single family remodels of a certain size. And in a community like Marin, where not a whole lot of new construction happens, policies for existing buildings really give us the opportunity to transform our building stock. So the Flex Path offers a list of weighted energy efficiency and electrification measures that builders can choose from in order to achieve a target score that allows them to do the upgrades that make the most sense for their specific home or building. And it includes low-cost measures like insulation, as well as high-cost measures like installing solar. So in order to achieve the policy consistency that we really want to see across jurisdictions, we've been encouraging Marin jurisdictions to adopt both of these. So for unincorporated Marin, our green building ordinance contained both of these policies. The ordinance was adopted on November 18th. It includes the Cal Green Tier 1 framework with the exception of the energy efficiency measures. Those are excluded because they can be difficult to enforce and hard to prove cost effective. And it also includes a readoption of our FlexPath policy for single family remodels that we initially adopted back in 2022 with some changes, including a change in the project size trigger. Originally, the policy applied to remodels over 750 square feet. We evaluated our permit data last year, and we found that we have a lot of remodels in Marin County, or in unincorporated Marin at least, that fall somewhere between 500 and 750 square feet. So we lowered the trigger to 500 square feet, which is going to extend the policy to about 50% more projects and increase those energy savings accordingly. And so I'm going to quickly run through the statuses of each of the cities and towns on these two policies, along with some notes about what they did in 2025 or what they're working toward in 2026. So just kind of starting at the top of the list here, Belvedere has not so far moved forward with adoption of Tier 1 or the FlexPath. Corte Madera in 2025 readopted their FlexPath policy, and they also changed the square footage trigger for their policy from 750 to 500 square feet in order to be consistent with the County of Marin and the City of San Rafael. So that was a good move toward consistency. Fairfax adopted the new Tier 1 standards, and they also readopted their FlexPath policy. Their FlexPath has a slightly different trigger at 200 square feet. Larkspur had some momentum and did attempt to adopt the Tier 1 framework in 2025, but there were some issues procedurally with the way they did it. They do have some political will there for sure, and are going to continue to work toward that adoption in 2026. Mill Valley adopted both Tier 1 and a FlexPath with a trigger of 500 square feet. Those are both new policies for Mill Valley. So that was great. And Novato has not adopted either of these so far. Ross has also not moved forward on either of these. San Anselmo in 2025 readopted their FlexPath, continuing with the 750 square foot trigger. They did not adopt the Tier 1 framework for 2025, although they had back in 2022. San Rafael readopted their 500 square foot FlexPath policy with some changes to their target score to increase impacts a little bit. And Sausalito, my line about Sausalito is a little bit misleading. They're on a very strong path to adopt both the Tier 1 framework as well as the FlexPath. Very soon, there were some little hiccups in their adoption process at the very end of 2025. But they're looking not only at those two policies, but also at adopting low carbon concrete ordinance as well. And then finally, Tiburon did adopt both Tier 1 and the FlexPath with the 500 square foot trigger in 2025. So just to kind of give an overview of where we're at county-wide, like we currently have 5 of the 12 Marin jurisdictions enforcing the Cal Green Tier 1 requirements, with a couple more working toward that this year. So hopefully we will have a majority, 7 of the 12 jurisdictions enforcing in 2027. And for the FlexPath, which I really believe should be a priority for Marin jurisdictions, we had 5 of the 12 enforcing the FlexPath in 2025. We now have 7 of the 12 enforcing in 2026. And we hope if momentum continues in a couple of these jurisdictions, we hope to have 9 of the 12 enforcing in 2027. So that's some pretty big progress toward consistency in the county. And then we also had several jurisdictions adjust their triggers for the FlexPath policy to that kind of happy medium project size trigger of 500 square feet. So, I mean, overall, I would say there's always more we can do, but I think that overall, we as a county should be proud of the progress that we made in 2025. You know, be happy to know that there's continues to be some momentum with some other jurisdictions that haven't done adoptions yet, especially all of that progress in light of the barriers that have been created by AB 130 is pretty awesome. So I think that's about all the time I have today, but if there's time for questions, if not, you can always shoot questions my way via email or call.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark, for that update. And it kind of ties things up locally from where we were. We heard earlier on a regional and statewide level. We're going to kind of switch topics here for a minute now. We just wanted to kind of do a recap briefly of what we saw, what happened last month. And let me see if I can share my screen. Yeah, so last month we had Daniel Swain, and actually I should say Ecologically Sound Practices put together a program where Daniel Swain talked. We don't usually have a meeting in December, so we were glad to join in on the ESP program. There were over 100 registrants for that program. We had 88 active attendees. So it was a great turnout. Per what Leslie's note, I will put this link into the chat in a little bit to our YouTube video on this presentation for those who want to see it. So let me just go through a couple of things about what he talked about. So his talk was on hydroclimate whiplash in California. And he started off by providing us some updates on where we sit in terms of global climate change. And not good, as we all know. It's continuing to warm. We're at least at 1.3 degrees C now as of 2022, greater than 1.5 C in 23 and 24. Data I don't believe is in yet on 2025 as far as that number is concerned, but they are saying 2025 was like the third hottest year on record. So we can guess it's coming in at the same place. Daniel then gave us an update on where we are in California and Marin. And if you look at this, the line on the right shows how we have warmed in California. We've got this stair step towards sustained increased warmth. And so we're not doing well here either. He then went on to explain what this hydroclimate whiplash is. And what that really is the state, and in fact, the world is now oscillating between periods of extreme drought and periods of extreme wet. And so that's why this is one of his slides. This just shows where things have been in the North Bay over the last 10 years or so. We've had several times of extremely dry weather, which have led to wildfires and drought. Then these have been interspersed with severe flooding, more severe than is typical. And so it's a back and forth sort of a scenario that is just creating havoc everywhere. And he talked about it using this kind of an example, which I thought was pretty good. So if you think of a sponge, the atmosphere is a little bit like a sponge where it can absorb moisture. And when the temperatures go up, the sponge, and we get these hydroclimate whiplashes, first of all, the sponge is bigger. So we have higher amounts of rainfall and precipitation when it's raining, but also when it's dry, this larger sponge has an ability to what he described as evaporative demand. That is, this atmosphere sucks whatever moisture there is in the soil, in our plant life, and in water, our water resources, to make things much more dry and more dangerous out there. That's what, and so we've got this thing where we're, none of us had ever heard of an atmospheric river till 5 years ago, I don't think, or less. And now we hear about them all the time. And what he described was these atmospheric rivers are going to become more frequent, and they're also going to become more intense. And so that's why we're seeing more and more of these, what are historically unprecedented events. He went on and he talked about, how this, and he used Southern California as an example of this hydroclimate whiplash. So one of the reasons we had the awful fires down there was because 23-24 we had a near record wet winter. In fact, we had 2 years of very wet winters. So we had a huge amount of vegetation which grew in Southern California, which then they had zero rain from early in the spring of 2024, and then a late starting winter in 2025. They had no rain until January. So they had an extreme drought for that 10 or 11 month period. So we had lots of moisture, and then we had an extreme drought, and then the annual Santa Ana winds came through, and they happened to this particular year. They coincided with a time period before we had any rains. Often in Southern California, the rains, like they do up here, they start in a little bit in November and they start in early December. We didn't have that in that year. So it's this combination of heavy rains producing lots of vegetation, and then dry conditions drying all of that out. So then Daniel talked about what we should expect coming up. Increased precipitation intensity and overall aridity, dramatic loss of mountain snowpack, because things are going to fall more likely in the form of rain than snow, more extreme heat, and more intense runoff. And so we're going to have greater variability. The driest dries will become still drier. Very wet periods will still occur and be more intense. So worse droughts and floods. He had slides which documented some of the historic floods we've had in the state and in Northern California, which we haven't had, which were on a 50 or 100-year time plan or time frequency, and those are going to happen more frequently. So he described that we need flexible and proactive interventions and adaptations commensurate with the increasing whiplash and still considered uncertainty. And then he talked about adapting to rising risk, more prescribed fire, and fire-resistant communities. He talked about, although we're having a heck of a time getting anywhere near what we need to be doing in terms of prescribed burns now, the time window during the year for when prescribed burns are going to be possible is going to get smaller. And so we're really going to have to figure out how to pick that up. So we need better flood forecasting, improve public and agency awareness of risks and interventions, disaster response exercises and scenario exploration that a lot of us participate in, stress testing the infrastructure, future-proofing new projects, and keep focused on resilience and dig deep to find win-win interventions that are beneficial to communities. So that's kind of a really quick overview of what he talked about. It was a 2-hour presentation by Daniel. Let me stop sharing my screen here, see if I can find chat and stick. There we go. So there's a link to his YouTube, to the YouTube presentation. So anyone who didn't see it, it's well worth the time. Belle, do you want to say anything about it?
I just wanted to say that, he's busy informing the public, legislators, journalists, professors, students, anybody, to all the conditions he talked about. And so you can tap into his websites. There are at least 3 of them. And you can find out today what he's thinking.
Yeah.
And that's important because things change, and this is his research, and it's ongoing, and it's unique in the sense that he puts his time in letting the public know what he's told us, and they can respond to it. So I think that information is on his slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And certainly it's in his presentation. He does a daily blog, or not a daily, but certainly multiple times a week. He does a blog where he does a office hour on what's happening latest. First of all, very interesting on what's happening in the California weather the coming week.
Exactly.
But also more broadly, he's quoted regularly in the New York Times and other papers. He really is a resource for people to look at. So
The Western weather guy.
yeah.
Could we get
Some-
access to those 5 slides that you showed? Those
Yeah.
are really good.
Yeah, sure, I can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me think. You could certainly, well, I would be more than happy to give you access if I can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
access to the slides.
Yes.
yeah, his
Not-
website.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I can.
You can put it on.
I send it out.
Those 5, because those 5 that can show.
So I'm gonna put back up, for just a second, his slide with the, websites, because people did ask that. If I can figure this out. Sharing. Okay, if you look in the lower left corner of this slide, he's got a YouTube channel at Weather West.
Yeah.
He's got a Blue Sky thing. He's got www.weatherwest.com. Anyway, those are all places to look for. So,
ESP, I have to send them out, but I'll send it to you.
yeah. So anyway, this was just sort of a more broad overview. And actually, I wanted to leave the group with one more thing that relates sort of to building electrification, but kind of shows what can happen. Australia has had a very aggressive program in the last several years encouraging solar. And so they have much greater solar penetration than pretty much anywhere in the world. Starting in about 2 months, Australia is going to offer for every citizen in the country, although it's kind of getting rolled out by regions, 3 free hours of electricity every day. Doesn't matter whether you have solar on your roof, whether you're a renter, whether you're a property owner. It's going to be the middle of the day when solar is plentiful, electricity is going to be free. And so you can, run your wash then. You can charge your car then. You can do whatever you can time shift into that 3-hour period, you can do for free. That's what we could be doing. So
Instead of cutting it all off.
yeah, anyway. So thanks, everybody. I think that'll wrap up the meeting here. Damon Connolly on the
Yeah,
18th.
let me just say a word about that.
Sure.
Yeah. He'll be here on the next meeting, February 18th, between 10 and 12. Probably at the end of the session, he'll talk. And he has his legislative agenda for 2026. Going to talk about that, and it covers pretty much all the things that matter to us, all the topics that matter to us, and also to other committees of MCL. But mostly it'll be very timely because he'll be putting it together. He's already let this be known to others. So we hope you all join in on it because he has a way of guiding us to the legislative session. It's a good appendix to what Madison was talking about. So
Thanks, Bill. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I think we learned a bunch. So thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Good.